Hello everyone. Today I would like to walk you through an example that I have designed to help your students understand the relationship between cost curves in the short run and in the long run, especially to understand the relationship between the short run average total cost curves and the long run average total cost curve. This is often something that students find a bit challenging, at least to my experience. So for that reason, I have created this example that is called Ben's Car Factory. And hopefully, if you use this example with your students, they will better understand how this works. All right, here we go. So we have Ben, who's an entrepreneur who intends to open a car factory. And there are two factors of production that are required to produce cars: machines and workers, and well, capital and labor, pretty much. And we are going to make an important assumption. We are going to assume that workers and machines, they are substitutable factors of production, which means that you can either produce a given amount of cars with many workers and few machines, or to produce this same amount of output with few workers and many machines. Okay, and the consequence is that, as I explained, there are different combinations of inputs that can produce the same level of output. And this combination of input, we call that the input mix. And this is what is particular about production in the long run. There are several ways you can produce the same level of output. And the objective is to choose the combination, the input mix, that will allow you to produce this level of output at minimum cost. And we call that the cost minimizing rule. And you know that it's such that the marginal rate of technical substitution must be equal to the input price ratio, or in other words, the ratio of the marginal productivities must be equal to the ratio of the input prices. But it doesn't really matter for now. Okay. All right, so cars can be produced with either many workers and a few machines, or vice versa. Okay. And let's just say, it's just an assumption, that the best combination of factors of production is to have two workers for one machine. So the cost minimizing rule tells us that you should hire two workers per machine. So the optimal capital intensity, which is the quantity of capital divided by the quantity of labor, is 1/2. Okay. If you have a capital intensity that is greater than 1/2, it means that you have too much machines relative to the number of workers that you have. And if your capital intensity is lower than 1/2, it means that you have too many workers compared to the number of machines that you have. So in this case, you would overuse the quantity of machines that you have. And we are in the long run, all right? This is a long run decision making, which means that the quantity of both capital and labor is variable. There is no fixed factor here. So therefore, it is when hiring workers and machines in this proportion, 2 workers per machine, that Ben will be able to produce any given level of output at minimum ATC. Here, I do not mean that we are going to be at the minimum point along the long-run average total cost curve. I just mean that for any given level of output, any value on the horizontal axis, we will produce at the minimum possible average total cost. This is what I mean here. Any capital intensity that is different from 1/2 is cost inefficient. We don't have the optimal input mix. We don't have the optimal combination of capital and labor, and therefore we will produce any quantity of output at an average cost that is not minimized. Okay, so of course, Ben, our entrepreneur, let me just check if the streaming is always good. So Ben, our entrepreneur, he wants to open his factory. So before he does that, he does some market research, and he concludes that, well, he will be able to produce 100 cars per day. Or to put it differently, this is when producing 100 cars per day that Ben will maximize his profit. Okay, So in this case, let's just make an assumption that if Ben wants to produce 100 cars per day, he will need 100 workers and 50 machines. So you see that the right capital and labor are combined efficiently in this case. 2 workers per machine. And when we have this basket of input, this combination of input, we can indeed produce 100 cars. This is what the production function would tell us, the relationship between input and output. Good. All right, so therefore the factors of production are used in a cost-efficient way, so Ben can produce 100 cars per day at minimum cost. No problem. Everything is good so far, but you will see that things are going to change now. But we will see now 3 cases. What if Ben is right? What if he actually produces 100 cars per day? And in this case, it's going to be straightforward. But what if he is wrong? What if he made a mistake? What if he was too optimistic and instead of producing 100 cars per day, he only produces 80 cars per day? And what if he was too pessimistic? Instead of producing 100 cars per day, he would like to produce 120 cars per day. We'll see what happens in this case. Okay, so first, let's just assume that Ben's market research is accurate. So his factory actually needs to produce 100 cars per day in order to maximize profit. In the short run, so what does it mean? Remember that when we talk about production, the difference between the short run and the long run is that in the short run, there is at least one input that is fixed, and usually we assume that capital is fixed, so the number of machines is fixed in the short run, which means that if I want to increase my production or to decrease my production, I can do it, no problem. I can change my output, but only by adjusting the quantity of workers that I have, okay? So in the short run, Ben produces these 100 cars per day with 100 workers and 50 machines according to what he had anticipated before, and his anticipations were correct. So in this case, he combines the factors of production in a cost-efficient way, meaning that he produces these 100 cars per day at minimum ATC. Okay, and in the long run, if we give sufficient time for Ben to adjust the quantity of machines, the quantity of capital that he has, he would not change anything, because in order to produce these 100 cars at minimum cost, he should have 50 machines and 100 workers, and this is exactly what he initially has. This is what he initially purchased when he opened his factory. He's already cost efficient. Okay. All right, so the cost in the short run is equal, the ATC in the short run is equal to the ATC in the long run, because the number of machines that he used in the short run is optimal. Capital is used efficiently. Let's try to see what happens on a diagram. On the horizontal axis, I have the number of cars, and on the vertical axis, I have the short run and long run ATC. So the number of cars that we initially planned, or what we anticipated to produce, was 100. What we actually produce is also 100. So you see that in this case, the short-run average total cost curve associated with 50 machines, because you know that there is one single long-run ATC, but there are as many short-run ATC curves as you have a number of fixed quantity of machines. So you will have one short-run ATC curve for 50 machines, one for 51, one for 52, and so on and so on. Okay, but you see that it is when you have 50 machines initially, it is when producing 100 cars that you will minimize your cost of production. And in this case, your cost in the long run is the same as your cost in the short run. Okay, but what if he has made a mistake? Remember, he carried out his market research, concluding that he was going to produce 100 cars per day. So he purchased 50 machines and hired 100 employees accordingly. But what if he made a mistake? And this is where we really understand the difference between the short run and the long run. So let's start to see the case where Ben was too optimistic. So the demand for his cars is lower than expected. So instead of producing 100 cars per day, he only needs to produce 75 cars per day. And you see, you probably start to see what problem Bain is facing now. The problem that Bain is facing is that he initially purchased 50 machines. But 50 machines is the right amount of machines when you want to produce 100 cars per day, not 75. If you only want to produce 75 cars per day, 100 machines is too much, which means that the quantity of capital that you have is underutilized. You do not have sufficient workers to use this quantity of capital, because in the short run, and this is what I explain here, in the short run, Ben cannot change the number of machines that he uses, 50 machines. So the only way to reduce production is to lay off some workers. In the short run, the only factor of production that is variable is labor. So if we want to adjust our production from 100 cars to 75 cars, the only thing I can do is to reduce the quantity of labor that I hire. Okay, so for example, let's say that he lays off 50 workers. The capital intensity is now equal to 1. Remember, he initially had 50 machines and 100 workers. So if we lay off 50 workers, we have 50 workers and 50 machines. And now the capital intensity is 1. And you see that it's not good, because in this case, capital and labor are not combined in the right proportion. The right proportion, the optimal input mix, is 2 workers for 1 machine. And here we have 1 machine for 1 worker. Okay? So what's going to be the consequence? In this case, he combines the factors of production in a cost-inefficient way, meaning that he fails to produce these 75 cars per day at minimum cost. So this is in the short run. Now, what if we give Ben enough time to correct his mistakes? He realizes that he was too optimistic and that he doesn't need to produce as much as he initially anticipated. So in the long run, when he has enough time to adjust the quantity of machines that he is going to purchase, what do you think he's going to do? Well, is this going to change anything? Of course. He's going to use fewer machines. He had too many machines to produce 75 cars, so he's going to reduce the number of machines in order to restore the optimal combination of the factors of production. Okay, so in the long run, and assuming that Ben's factory still needs to produce 75 cars per day, Ben will adjust the input mix in order to restore cost efficiency. And remember, cost efficiency is achieved in our example when you have 2 workers per machine. For example, Ben may decide to hire 80 workers and 40 machines overall, not to add, but overall to have 80 workers and 40 machines, which is less than before. Initially, when he planned to produce 100 cars, he had 100 workers and 50 machines. Now that he realizes that he only needs to produce 75 cars per day rather than 100, he's going to get less labor and less capital. And this adjustment is only a long-run adjustment. It cannot be a short-run adjustment, because in the short run, we can't change the quantity of machines that we have. In that case, you see that we have the optimal input mix, 2 workers per machine. Okay. The optimal capital intensity is restored, so Ben produces these 75 cars per day at minimum ATC. All right. If it sounds a bit difficult, we're going to have a look at the diagram in a minute to see how we can represent what has happened. So overall, Ben's ATC is higher in the short run than in the long run, because the number of machines that he used in the short run was too large to produce 75 cars. Capital was underutilized. Indeed, the number of machines that he uses in the short run is optimal to produce 100 cars, but not 75. Okay, let's have a look at the diagram. So, okay, this is where we start. So that's my long run average total cost. That's the short run ATC when I have 50 machines. This short run ATC is, or let's put it differently, 50 machines is optimal to produce 100 cars. How do I see that? I see it because it is when I produce 100 cars, then my short-run ATC is equal to my long-run ATC. For any other level of output, more than 100 cars or less than 100 cars, 50 machines, which is associated with this blue curve, is not the right number of machines. In particular, if I want to produce more than 100 cars, I would need more than 50 machines. And if I want to produce less than 100 cars, I would need fewer machines. All right, so I made a mistake. I initially thought that I would produce 100 cars, but I only produced 75. So in the short run, I cannot change the quantity of capital that I have. So the only thing I can do when I reduce production from 100 cars to 75 cars, I will lay off workers, but I will keep 50 machines. So this will be represented by a movement along this short-run ATC curve from A to B, all right? So you see, it doesn't really matter that the cost increases. What matters is that at 75 cars, my short-run ATC is above my long-run ATC. You see that I fail to produce these 75 cars at minimum ATC, which would be right here on the long-run ATC curve. So then this is from A to B, this is what happens. This is the short-run adjustment when we realize that we have made a mistake. What's going to happen in the long run? Well, we will reduce the number of machines that we hire from 50 machines to 40 machines, which means that we are going to be on another short-run ATC curve, but now the one that is associated with 40 machines rather than 50 machines. And you see that this quantity of machines is indeed optimal to produce 75 cars. How do I see that? I see it because it is when producing 75 cars that my short-run ATC is equal to my long-run ATC. So in the long run, Ben is going to move from B to C. We produce the same level of output, but at a lower cost. How is this possible? Simply because when I move from B to C, I restore the optimal input mix to workers per one machine. Okay, I hope you get it now. Let's just do the other way around, just to wrap our head around this concept. So previously Ben was too optimistic initially, and eventually he realized that he didn't need to produce 100 cars but 75 cars. What if it's the opposite? What if he was too pessimistic? So he purchased 50 machines and he hired 100 workers because he thought that he would need to produce 100 cars per day. But what if he was too pessimistic and actually he needs to produce 125 cars per day? The same thing, in the short run, we cannot change the quantity of capital that we have. We only have 50 machines. So the only way to increase production is to hire more workers. But the problem, as you can imagine, is that if we hire more workers and if we have a fixed quantity of capital, we will have too many workers compared to the number of machines that we have. In this case, we say that capital is overutilized. And the consequence is that because you do not combine capital and labor in the right proportion, two workers per machine, you will fail to minimize your average cost of production. So let's say he hires 50 extra workers. So now we have 150 workers for 50 machines. So the capital intensity is too low. Too low means we have too many workers, too much workers compared to the quantity of machines that we have. Okay, so he combines the factors of production in a cost-inefficient way, meaning that he fails to produce these 25 cars per day at minimum ATC. Well, no big deal. The only thing that matters is that it has to be more than 100. Okay, in the long run, and assuming that Ben's factory still needs to produce 125 cars per day, what do you think Ben is going to do? In the long run, he has the ability to adjust the quantity of labor and the quantity of capital, and as you can imagine, because in a short run he is stuck in a situation where capital is overutilized, where he doesn't have enough machines relatively to the number of workers that he has. In the long run, he's going to purchase more machines to increase the capital intensity to make it back up to 1/2. More machines. For example, Ben may decide to hire 120 workers and 60 machines. Remember that initially to produce 100 cars, we had 100 workers and 50 machines. So we increased the quantity of both capital and labor compared to the initial situation, but in the same proportion. So you see that the ratio, the capital intensity, is in this case equal to 1/2. So labor and capital are combined in the cost efficient way, which means that Ben will be able to produce these 125 cars at minimum ATC. Okay, so yeah, same thing. Overall, Ben's ATC is higher in the short run than in the long run. So the short run means before he can adjust the quantity of capital, and in the long run, after he has adjusted the quantity of capital. Because the number of machines that he used in the short run is too small, capital was overutilized. Okay, same thing. To conclude, let's have a look at the diagram. So that's my initial situation. This is the same diagram as before. We made a mistake. Oh, sorry, same thing. Typo here should be 125. 125 over here, not 75. So initially, when we move from A to D, why do we move along this short-run ATC curve? Because in the short run, I am stuck with my 50 machines. So the only way to produce more cars is to hire more workers. But the problem is that you see that at point D, I failed to minimize my ATC. The minimum cost of production, the minimum average total cost of production to produce 125 cars would be right there, represented by the long run ATC curve. But in the long run, I can hire more machines, so I will be on a new short run ATC curve, the one associated with 60 machines, and it is indeed when associating or combining 60 machines with 120 workers that I can produce 125 cars at minimum cost. How do I know that? I know it because it is for this level of output, 125, that my short-run ATC is equal to my long-run ATC. Okay, so basically from A to D, this is the short-run adjustment, and from D to E, this is the long-run adjustment. All right, I hope this makes sense. It makes sense to me. It seems to make sense to my students as well, to explain the relationship between the short run and the long run. And so, yeah, you should give it a try in your classroom and give me a feedback to just to tell me how it went. All right, thanks everyone. I wish you a very good day. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.